let me say this. First of all, thank you very much for having me here in your conference. And you know, the most difficult thing for probably any keynote speaker is to decide what to say first before you start. If you are in Asia, normally people apologize something. If you go in a conference in America, they start with a joke. And I decided to open this keynote by apologizing this bad joke. Anyway, I want to make two quick remarks before I go into this question of Finnish education. It's not really a miracle, but it's a kind of a little story about education here. Yesterday, those who read the news, the world news actually yesterday, you saw that Finland is again ranked as the best education system in the world. I don't belong to those who believe that we should be ranking school systems simply like this. I have a lot to say about this study done yesterday, but please don't listen to me as somebody who would advocate the idea that Finland is the best country in the world in education and then everybody else will follow. We probably only want to be better than Sweden, but everything else is fine. So let's, I think as educators we should be staying away of these things and understand that education as a whole is much more complex issue than ranking countries in terms of their performance. The second one I think is an important notion here is that if you come from other country than Finland here this morning, I didn't come here from all the way from Helsinki to try to convince you that if you only do what the Finns have been doing during the course of the last 30 or 40 years and put those ideas into your own education system, everything will be fine. It doesn't work like this. I think probably the best thing that Finland can serve, and this is actually the main idea of my book, Finnish Lessons, is to serve as inspiration for others, to ask questions, to look at your own education system and schools and things you do in a kind of a different point of view. And the beauty of this Finnish story is that it's so different. It's unique in a way. Because like many people say that Finland is not only doing most things differently to others, but almost the opposite way. And that's why, especially if you are from the United States of America or from England, you will recognize this. Are there any Americans here in the hall? One. Welcome. Good to have you here. Anybody from England? Okay, so you will find this also very interesting. How many Finns do we have here? Wonderful. And Swedes? 2, 3. Wonderful. You are welcome too. Yeah. I'm very careful with these things related to Sweden. But you know, let me start by the goal of this presentation is to try. I can only highlight one thing in this 45 minutes that I have. I'm going to show you, if there's time, a little bit the news coverage, how the world has been reporting some of these things in Finland and in another country. But the whole point is here that we have what Finland has been doing, what most of the other countries have not done if you look at the history of the last 30, 40 years, is that we have basically had the same idea in improving our education system. We have not changed the kind of overall goal, the dream of education here in this country. And that's why I think our schools and principals and teachers and communities who are running the schools here, they have been able to focus on certain things and make sure that they can do these things. And this one thing has been the equality of educational opportunity, or equity in education, if you wish. But let me show you some things here. I often ask, particularly audiences like this, where we have people from all over the world, and there may be some of you who have not been in Finland before. Education conferences, there are normally two types of people. There are Finns and wannabe Finns. And many people in the education conferences, they want to be Finns because they see that this is exactly what we would like to have also in our education. But I often start by asking people that, so what do you think, what do you see when you hear the word Finland? And this is a kind of a little mental exercise for you who came here, those of you who are here for the first time now in Finland. What did you think the country is all about? I've been doing this around the world now during the last 3 or 4 years, and every event, even my wonderful events in Sweden, people always have the same image of Finland, that Finland is somehow looks like this. And not only that Finland looks like this in Lapland sometimes, but there are people who say that Finland looks like this always, all the time, everywhere. And then there are those people who say that because Finland looks like this all the time, everywhere, that's why pupils are doing so well in school, because there's nothing else to do but go to school, stay indoors with the teacher and come back home and do homework. Seriously. There are some authors, some writers who argue that the good performance of Finnish children is because of the climate. It's nothing else. There's nothing, no teachers, no schools. It's simply the climate. It's so horrible to be here that there's nothing else to do but this. And there are many other things related to this kind of a coldness, this kind of a strange place here. There are many people who tell me that based on my Finnish friends, the people I know from Finland, I can tell that they're very quiet, silent people, that they don't talk very much. Some people say that Finns only talk when it's absolutely necessary to say something, yeah? And you have probably heard this story about this, and my Finnish colleagues here may either agree or disagree with me. This story about the Finnish couple who had been married for 25 years, yeah? Nowadays it's a kind of a strange thing to be married to the same person for 25 years, but there was this couple, and the wife one day came to the husband and said that, "Darling, why don't you ever speak to me like the English and American and French, Swedish men to their wives, you know, saying things like, I love you and all these other things." And this Finnish man was a little bit like surprised about this question. I said, "Do you remember 25 years when we got married?" And she said, "Of course I remember our wedding day." And then he said that, "Then you also remember that on our wedding day, when we got married, I told you that I love you." And she said, "Of course I remember this." And then the Finnish man said that, "If I change my mind, I'll let you know." But you know, if the images of our country are something like this, that is cold and people don't talk and they eat raw fish every morning for breakfast, and in the evening they go naked in the kind of a very hot room with other people naked, how can this country have an education system that yesterday and today are in the headlines of all world media? It just doesn't make any sense. But now, let's take a closer look at some of the things that I want to remind people. And there are 3 things I think that are important to take a little bit closer look before we start to look at what the education actually is all about. And my theory here this morning is really that there's no miracle, there's no kind of a secret or surprise in education. Because, you know, if these 3 things are true, then it becomes normal that, of course, education works in a place like this, that there's nothing strange. The first question is that, or fact actually is that the education has not always been a kind of an issue that Finland has been noted for. In other words, if we use the word educational performance, that is much more than the test results and these things that people normally use in the media. We look at the enrollment and graduation and efficiency and equity and many other things in the performance. About 40 years ago, when Finland started to build this system that we have now, we were clearly behind the rest of the world, or the world average, if you wish. It's difficult to say where the international average is because we didn't have data at that time. But Finland has been actively participating in the international studies of math and science and reading for a long time. And if we look at those data and some indications for equity and equality, for example, it's easy to conclude, like I have done in my book, that Finland has been below most of the countries, particularly our Western neighbors. And this is how I think the progress has taken place in the world. There are many people who argue that internationally the progress of education systems around the world has not been what it was supposed to be, taking the money and investments, and somehow Finland has been able to gradually, continuously improve the performance. And that's why Finland is one of the very rare countries, for example, within the OECD that is doing these measurements that can show that there has been a kind of a continuous growth in educational performance. There are not too many other places where this type of steady progress has been reported. Only if this is true, then we can ask the question from the Finns, what did you do? What is behind this that explains the faster development and growth than in most other countries? Particularly, just before I was coming here, one of our main TV stations called me, and that's why I was a little late, and they said that why Denmark, Sweden and Norway are so much behind of Finland in this study published yesterday and in the PISA. Yeah, it's a very interesting question, why this separation? Because we were running behind Sweden, Norway and Denmark 30 years ago. So there must be something that we have been doing differently compared to our neighbors. Then the second one, and equally important, is that Finland has never wanted to be number one. We never set our educational goals to be on the top of the world. Yeah? If you look at the education strategies of different countries now, I can find at least 10 countries where they literally say that we want to be among the top 5 countries in 2025. But we have never done this. And you know, this is something that goes back to my work with the Ministry of Education, the National Board of Education. About 15 years ago, I went to Sweden, Stockholm, with our minister then, and the Swedish minister was explaining us the overall national strategy and development plan for the Swedish education system to be the best in the best school system in the world by the first OECD PISA. Sweden was not alone, there were many others. Norway had the same, Germany had the same. Americans have always had the plan to be number one in education, as they have sometimes been. And when our minister's term came to reply, she said that thank you very much for all this information, but I can tell you that our goal in Finland is much more modest than yours, because, you know, for us it's enough to be ahead of Sweden. And then we went to, I apologize this from our Swedish friends here, and then she went to explain how Finland is seeing the educational development and education policies. And this is how the Finnish education policy has more or less looked like. If you take the priority of our, the kind of a spearhead of our education thinking, it's to have a good school for everybody. And this is about equality and equity in education. And we still have, if you look at the current education development plan for 5 years in Finland that we are working on now, that's the same thing, that enhancing equity, making sure that everybody has the opportunity to learn. And then the third fact I think that is important is that it's not only education, but many other things. I'm not saying that Finland is a perfect place, that everything works here, but many important things are working well. And nowadays we have all sorts of rankings and indicators. Different institutions and universities and agencies are doing this. If you take a look at some of these, and you can Google them easily, they are done by different institutions, it shows that if we benchmark our performance in the United States, that many countries want to do, because America is somehow seen as a kind of a model benchmark, you will see that Finland is doing fairly well in almost anything we do. But there are some things that I'm not showing here that are not so well. For example, we have certain things that we do also well. But, you know, the technology, for example, and many of these things are the things that people don't simply know. They don't know that Finland is equitable, high gender, equal country with the competitive capitalist market economy and so on. But look at the technology. How many of you know Angry Birds here? Okay? And you play Angry Birds, I guess, yeah? Angry Birds is from Finland, you know that? You didn't, okay? Now when you go home from this conference, you can tell your wife or husband that Finland has Angry Birds, yeah? And then there's another interesting thing, the United Nations Happiness Index, yeah? That ranks Finland right after Denmark, the second, yeah? I see Danish people here already cheering, yeah? Good, so you are better than us in something, and if you're happier than Finns, that's a great thing to have, yeah? I often tell people that if you want to see how happy Finns really look like, come to Helsinki on Monday morning in November. and take a public bus transportation anywhere, and you will see how cheerful everybody is. Yeah? But so now you know when you go home from this conference, you can say that Finland has angry birds and happy people, right? Because there are many countries where they have happy birds but angry people, and many people are angry because of the state of education. Then there was this thing that created a lot of media coverage about 2 years ago. One of the biggest magazines, the Newsweek, published this story that the best country in the world is Finland. And there was interesting detail here because, you know, this comparison was done in a different way. There's particular things that they are comparing. Education is one of them. And out of 100 in this index, Finnish score was 102. Yeah? And because of this, there were 2 phone calls in the morning when this issue was published to the Newsweek headquarters asking for recount, saying that you have made a mistake. Because Finland has 2 points too much, and if you take these 2 points away, Switzerland is the best country in the world, and Finland is only second. Do you know where these phone calls came from? If you say Stockholm, incorrect. From Helsinki, yeah? Our 2 newspapers, they called and asked for recount from Finland, right? And next day, the Helsingin Sanomat, our biggest newspaper, published the editorial saying that everybody thinks that Finland is the best country in the world except the Finns. And we had exactly the same reaction for education when the first PISA results came out, that we simply didn't believe that this can be true. This is what the USA Today said about 1 year ago, last November. Think about this, and this is particularly to my American colleague here. That if you want to live American dream today, move to Finland. Not my idea, ladies and gentlemen. This is what one of the biggest American newspapers is saying. So, you know, there's a lot of this kind of a hype in the world now about Finland and education and all these things. And that's why my theory is that it's not, that we should not only look at education, what Finns are doing in education, but it's interesting to see how Finns are doing things overall. Yeah? How do we make our economy work? How do we deal with the banking crisis now when Europe is in a turmoil? How do we deal with women, the gender issues here, where Finland is one of the leading nations also in terms of how we are trying to give both genders the equal voice and equal right. You know, this is what was published yesterday, and I'm not going to go into the details of this study, but today, this morning, the world media is again full of these things. This was in a big story in the BBC, for example, yesterday, where the countries, 40 countries are ranked again using a different type of criteria. And there, the 2 top countries were Finland and South Korea. And now I would like to show you a little clip. This takes about 10 minutes, and then I will run the rest of my presentation, because this will show you how the world media is reporting these 2 countries, South Korea and Finland, together, okay? And this is a CNN, a kind of a trusted news channel in the United States, all over the world, so many people have seen it. I don't know if you have seen this, but if we have an audio here, I'll show you this thing, because it gives you even more to think about how can it be. And you can sit back and relax and have a little chat with your new friend also, if you want to. But let me see, let's hope that this is...
Welcome to Seoul, South Korea, capital city of one of the world's fastest growing economies. There are many reasons to be impressed with this Asian tiger that rose from the ashes of a civil war. But South Korea's crown jewel is its education system. Thanks to a militant drive for success, this nation's students have outperformed the rest of the world for the better part of a decade. On the most recent PISA exam, the benchmark international test, South Korea ranked first in reading and second in math among all nations.
Okay, I'll give you 1 minute with your new friend. Have a chat. We'll try to get the picture here. Okay. Missä se nyt on? Okei, anna olla sen. Pistä vaan pistä päälle se vaan. Okay, time over.
South Korea, teachers are known as nation builders.
President Obama has noticed, singing Korea's praises on a regular basis. On a visit to Seoul in 2009, he asked South Korean President Lee Myung-bak what his biggest challenge was in education. The president's reply, Korean parents care too much about their children's success. We visited the Cho family on a typical day for their son, Song-do. He gets up every day at 6 a.m., jumps rope as the sun comes up, then eats a massive breakfast his mother has prepared. She says a healthy meal helps his concentration. Sung-do's studies are especially important this year because next November he'll take an all-important college entrance exam. It's the ultimate test in a particularly test-driven education system.
Since the family is really expecting a lot from me and supporting me a lot, I think I have to return their favor.
Sung-do goes to school from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. on most days, much longer hours than most American students. There are about 205 school days in South Korea's calendar, 25 more than the typical US schedule.
청소년 비행이라는 뜻이에요.
Over the course of their academic careers, South Korean children will spend almost 2 more years in the classroom than their American counterparts. After classes let up, Sung-do studies for hours in a school cubicle and takes his dinner in the school cafeteria. Then he'll sometimes go to a late-night cram school, known in Korea as a hagwon.
이 빛을 더 강화시켜버리는 거야.
Hagwons are nocturnal schools for kids offering classes in science, math, or any other subject that's covered on the big college exam. After-school instruction is very popular here, enrolling 3/4 of the nation's students. The average Korean family spends roughly 20% of their income on private tutoring. Back home, Sung-do usually continues his studies well after midnight.
It's true that my study hours is horrible, but I believe that I might as well enjoy the pain that I cannot avoid. So I'm not trying my best to enjoy this environment and this age.
The Korean education system is at the heart of an extraordinary economic success story. 30 years ago, the nation's per capita income was less than $1,700. Today, it's almost $24,000. But many here think that the pain students endure is not worth the price of admission to the world's elite. Suicides among school-age children are abnormally high, doubling in 2009 compared to 2003. President Lee Myung-bak has made easing academic pressure one of his top priorities, pledging to reduce study loads and create a more engaging curriculum for students.
The process is so painful. They don't know how to enjoy learning.
An Byung-man is a former Minister of Education and now advises the President. As minister, he changed the college admissions process so there would be less emphasis on the entrance exam. He also targeted the late-night cram schools, which were known to drill students past midnight. There is now a 10 p.m. curfew for the schools, South Korea's very own law to prevent students from studying too hard. Citizens can actually report misbehaving cram schools to the government for a cash reward. The tipsters have become known as the Hagparazzi. We followed a team of cram school inspectors one night as they made their rounds in Seoul's Gangnam district. There's a hagwon in this neighborhood on almost every corner. The team looked for any suspiciously lit schools where students might be receiving an illicit algebra lesson. One school was open, and the inspectors issued a penalty. They've exposed 75 schools this year alone. An Byung-man hopes that South Korea can eventually reach a happy medium between its infectious enthusiasm for education and its students' well-being.
We should try to make students be happy to learn. That's very important to me. So that's what I hope for the future of Korea.
Coming up, Is there a kinder, gentler way for students to make the grade? We'll visit a country where students spend far less time in the classroom than South Korea, yet enjoy remarkable results.
There's a commercial break here.
South Korea's students spend way more time in the classroom than Americans. That might explain why they've been outperforming us lately by leaps and bounds. But there's another country where students spend less time in class than the South Koreans, and their performance is also off the charts. Finland. On the surface, Finland is the education world's ultimate slacker.
Että jos mä haluan huoneesta musta, niin sit tulee.
Children don't start school here until they're 7 years old. They have far less homework than many countries, and they log fewer hours in the classroom than most developed countries, even the United States. But don't be fooled. Finnish students score first in the world in science and second in the world in math.
That's a kind of amazing thing that we are able to achieve high internationally in these academic areas that are measured with a very little work and a very short school days.
Pasi Sahlberg is a leading figure in Finland's education field and works with its Ministry of Education. In his recent book, Finnish Lessons, he says Finland is less concerned about the amount of time students spend in class than with how that time is spent.
If we could calculate how much time young people engage in real learning, I think Finnish young people are probably at the same level where your children or Japanese or Koreans are.
Ja tuossa on yhteiskunnallista.
In Finland schools, teachers spend less time drilling the facts and more time developing students' creativity. Most importantly, says Sahlberg, hardly any time is spent preparing students for standardized tests.
We have deliberately removed all those things. We never had a standardized testing system, and I hope that we never will.
But how can Finland afford to be so flexible in its approach and still get great results? The answer is simple. They have great teachers. Teaching is a highly respected profession here, on par with doctors and lawyers.
Eli lehmästä oli kyse.
That's because they're all required to have master's degrees.
Tässä on tehty tällä tavalla.
The competition for those degrees is fierce. Only 1 in 10 applicants is accepted to primary school teacher training programs.
The elementary teacher program is hardest to get in the university. It's harder to get in than to medical school or law school. And I think teachers' task is to give this.
Kristi Lanka, a professor of educational psychology at the University of Helsinki, says her school routinely turns away highly qualified candidates. It's the exact opposite situation in America. Almost half of all US teachers graduate in the bottom third of their college class.
I'm asking what kind of information we need.
Kaisa Heikkinen was one of the lucky ones accepted to the University of Helsinki's teacher education program.
From sort of day one, they start making you think about the importance of how you're teaching and what it is that you're trying to get across. It's not just your subject, it's also that you're raising future citizens. When you think about Finland, what comes to mind?
In addition to managing her course load, she practices her craft at a local school under the watchful eye of an experienced teacher.
Definitely from the start, they put you on the spot and you have to start kind of performing as a teacher.
한 단어를 한 번씩만 써보세요.
South Korea and other high-performing nations are known for their well-trained educators too. But in Finland, teachers are given far more autonomy. There is a national curriculum here, but it's just a framework, serving as a guide for each school instead of a top-down edict. And because teachers don't have standardized tests to worry about, they can teach their students however they want.
It's like in a company, you have a strategy of the company, but you are not watching each employee all the time. So it's very autonomous profession.
But this autonomy and handing over the responsibility of many things to schools would not have been possible if we hadn't had this academic program for training teachers. So without good teachers, you cannot really do this.
Yksi näistä tehtävistäni
With all of that responsibility and the respect that comes with it, Finnish educators tend to stay in their profession, compared to the US, where the turnover among teachers is roughly 7 times higher. But let's get real for a moment. What can America learn from a tiny, ethnically homogeneous country that's home to just over 5 million people? Sahlberg agrees that size does matter, but he points out that over 30 American states are similar to Finland in population.
Colorado, or you look Maryland, or Minnesota, or Massachusetts, very close to what Finland could be.
But an American classroom is likely to be far more diverse, featuring many different languages and ethnic origins, and have a great deal more poverty. Only 4% of Finnish children are poor, while in the US the rate is over 20%.
I've been in these classrooms in the United States, and whenever I see these huge diversities and poverty, I'm helpless.
Can an education system...
All right. What do you think? Interesting comparison, yeah? Okay. The next question we need to ask is, okay, the next question we need to ask is this. Is Finland where it is now because we have same policies and same types of reforms that everybody else, or perhaps because we have different policies and different implementation? There are some people in the world who believe that Finland is doing better than others because we are small and homogeneous, and it's always cold and dark outside, so it's easier to make these reforms work, that we are doing same things that everybody else basically. But the important notion here is that we have very different way of thinking about particularly education reforms than many or most other countries. And I'll show you some examples of how we are different. What are probably the most important things that we are seeing ourselves as a different. I have a little notion called global educational reform movement, and if you take the first letters of this 3-word term, it's a germ, yeah. And I think it really is a germ. It's a virus that is traveling around the world with the institutions and consultants and people and politicians, thinking about how education is best improved in different places. I'm not calling this a theory. When I was a young man and I went to teacher education, I had big ideas about the world. And I had 2 theories how to educate children, but I didn't have any kids. Now I have 2 boys, but no theories anymore. This is how it works. It's a practice, like in this conference. I think it's a practice that matters. All right? So very quickly, some of the things that I just try to highlight how we are doing things differently in education policy and reform in Finland, and how practically the rest of the world is doing. And some of the countries in the world are more infected by the germ. Some of them are really like hospitalized already, or should be, and some other countries are just having a kind of a minor symptoms. But one of the most kind of a common thing that you see if you travel around the world and look at the education is the kind of a intention to run education like you run the business, through competition, thinking that if we make teachers and principals and schools to compete against one another, things will get better. Just like it will improve the quality of mobile phone network providers and lower the price if you have a competition over there. So this idea of competing, making school and education like a marketplace, is everywhere nowadays. In some places it's even taken over the whole public sphere. In this country, the collaboration, networking and sharing has been the main idea, and still is in our education, that we believe that the best way to improve the quality of education system and the work of the schools and teachers is to try to reward efforts to do things together and share good practices, and this is what we have been trying to do and still try to do our policies as well. Related to competition is the increased parental choice by opening different types of alternative schools and free schools and charter schools and private schools, all sorts of things that increase competition and enhance choice for parents. It's a very common way. There are very few education systems in the world anymore where public schools would be a kind of a only way to do things. In Finland, we don't have any private schools in a sense that many other countries have, because here you cannot charge money for education. So that's why we have a 75 or 80 kind of independent licensed schools, but they're all part of the public network. In Finland, rather than advocating choice, we have decided to focus on equity, and I say a little bit more about the equity in a minute, and define also what equity here means, but this means basically trying to build a good school for everybody, all the children in all the communities. Standardization is another thing that is a common thing in many other countries, standardizing procedures of teaching and learning, aiming to, go towards the same goals, the same standards, and then use standardized testing also as a kind of a means to check whether these have been achieved. In Finland, we rely much more on customization or individualization of education, or personalization, if you wish, meaning that the schools in Finland do have their own curriculum. They have a kind of a freedom to decide what is the best way to do things, and many students in Finland have their own personal, individual plan how to study and how to work. And that's why we think instead of standardization, we rely much more on personalization or individualization. And finally, the accountability, kind of a test-based accountability movement that is very strong around the world, meaning that people believe that things will get better if we hold teachers and principals more accountable for students' outcomes, the results, so that if you don't deliver good results, you will be fired, or your school will be closed, or your salary will decrease, or all of these things. In Finland, I think we have much more focused on trying to strengthen the responsibility within the schools, responsibility of the education and the work you do, and also responsibility that teachers and schools have to the children and their communities. Not only accountability that works normally upwards, that the school is accountable to authorities up there. But in Finland, I think we have much more kind of a horizontal responsibility and accountability as well, and it's much more based on trust rather than tests, standardized tests. So these are some of these things. If you want to read more about these things, how they play out in Finland, there's a section of this in my book. Finnish lessons will be available in Dutch in January. I know that there are many Dutch people. I'm going to be in Holland for 3 or 4 days to speak about these things. So if you want to have a Dutch version, it will be there in the middle of January. All right. So another good question is that what has been the impact of this germ? In other words, has it been a good idea to enhance competition, choice, standardization, standardized testing, test-based accountability, and all these things? Very difficult question to answer, but look at this. This is the thing that most of you have seen already. This is from the OECD PISA database. So I've taken the 2000, 2003, and 2006, the first 3 PISA studies that indicate something about the effectiveness of the education policies and reforms of the 1990s. And all these countries here that you see, they all have had more or less this infection of germ in their school systems through these 4 things that you saw, and some other things as well that have been typical in the education policies. Interesting notion here is that anyone can see is that there's a decline in all math scores in all these countries, and it doesn't change, the picture doesn't change significantly if I change science or reading here. So it's all downhill in all of these countries. Okay, so let's put Finland here, so you will see how Finland has been different without, trying to remain immune to the germ and doing things in a Finnish way that I mentioned. And of course, this doesn't prove anything. This is not a proof against the germ or for Finnish system, but it's just an interesting notion that there must be something that we need to talk more about these education policies and how they work. But that's why the Finnish history of education reform is very different to these most others. So now let me take one more thing, and then I have a conclusion for this talk, and I understand that we have a conversation after the break here, because I think that this is something that is too little discussed in the education circles, but it's becoming a very significant and important thing. And my first question here to ask about whether the income inequality, in other words, the distribution of national wealth in our countries, is somehow related to educational performance, how children are learning in our school systems, all right? So I constructed this little picture from using the Wilkinson and Pickett's wonderful book called The Spirit Level. If you haven't read The Spirit Level, please do, because it's a great story about inequality and how it's making things, not only education, but almost everything much more difficult in our countries if we just let it go, all right? So we have an income inequality in this line here, so meaning that if you have a big distribution of wealth and a lot of inequality in your country will be somewhere here, right? And if you have a little inequality, in other words, if you have a more equal situation in terms of wealth and poverty, you are somewhere here. And then educational performance is high up and low down, all right? And this is the overall average here in the middle, okay? So now, to my American friend here, where do you think United States is in this map? I'm not teasing you, I just ask you a question. Where would you put the United States here? Just to make sure that we understand where we are. Sorry to wake you up, by the way. All right. Yeah, okay, very good. It's somewhere here. The learning outcomes are a little bit below the average, but United States is one of the most unequal nations in the world. There's only Singapore, I think, that has more disparity in terms of how wealth is distributed. Okay, and Finland, where would Finland be? It's over there. Yeah. So here you see how these countries are different, and I'll give you some of the others. You can probably find your own. These are not all the countries here. I have 22 wealthiest nations here, but you will see that if I put the regression line here, you will see that somehow the income inequality, in other words, the poverty, level of poverty in the country and the educational performance are related, okay? So this is lesson number one, is that if you want to sustainably build an education system that is performing well for everybody, you have to do something to the income inequality. In other words, the more equal nation you have, more likely the schools are working better in this system. Look at the spirit level. It's an interesting story about the other things there. Let's take a closer look now on education, all right? So this is what we often see, that when we compare countries, we only focus on excellence. Excellence here means the measured outcomes of education using the studies like PISA and TIMSS and PIRLS and whatever we have available, all right? This is the OECD, map of the OECD that is often doing these every 3 year studies, and PISA, for example, and these are the countries that, we can list like this. I particularly don't like the way of presenting these things like this, where you say that United States is number 17 in science and Finland is number 1 in this. This is not very interesting there, but unfortunately this is how this data is often presented. Now, let's take another way to look at this thing, and very few people actually know that the OECD is also comparing countries in terms of how equitable the education systems are. And equity here, I define equity as the strength of the relationship between the children's family background and how well they are doing in the school. Are you with me? Yeah? Because we know that normally if you don't do anything, if you just let things go, those children who are coming from the families with lower level of education, income, poverty, those things typically are not performing, not learning in the school to the same level as children from the educated, better off families, right? This is a common knowledge. All the educators know this, all right? So now, if the country has more equitable system of education, the country will be here, right? So if you have a strong equity, you are here. If you have a weak equity, then you are here. And weak equity means that poor will not learn so well, and those who are better off will perform better than the children who come from the poorer circumstances, all right? So where is United States now? It's over here. people are often surprised that America is so close to the average. Yeah, so it's not really a too bad place to be in terms of equity. Okay, let me put here some of the other countries. These are not all the OECD countries, but what's interesting here is that if you look at where these countries are finding their place, they're almost like in a stairway to heaven, right? They're trying to climb up there where the high-performing countries, South Korea, Canada, and Japan are, okay? There are no countries here with a high equity and low level of learning, or high level of learning and low equity. Somehow there seems to be a relationship, right, between the equity in education, defined as this one, and the academic performance in education. But now you ask, where's Finland? Right? And all those visitors who are still wondering how the Finnish flag looks like, let me show you where Finland was in 1972. Yeah, you know, this is where we were in 1972, and now the good question is that, okay, so what has happened during the last 30 or 40 years? And, you know, this question is not so simple, because there are many ways to get better, okay? You can go either high up and then move that way, or you can move horizontally and then go up, or you can just follow these steps like everybody else. Let me show you. If you look at the Finnish map, I'll show you what has been the way of Finland since 1972 when we started to build the school system, and it looks like this. Wow, and you can give a little applause to Finland here, yeah? All right, and what is significant here is that the Finnish way has been the way of heavily investing in equity, systematically building the school that is able to serve everybody by funding school evenly, by having a special education services early on in every school, having school meals and well-being services universally everywhere all the time for all the children. Yeah? And we have managed the choice. So as you remember before, that Finland has never really allowed markets to take place the school. That we have choice, but it's a kind of a carefully managed throughout the history, and that's why I think the situation as it is. And the OECD is calling these countries a high-performing education system. So if there's any lesson from this to anybody in the world really using the OECD data, it is that if you want to get better, if you want to have a higher performing education system, it's not enough to look at the curriculum, teachers, assessments, computers, management, all these things. They're all important part of this excellence, improving excellence. You also have to invest in equity and rethink some of these things, what really makes your school system more equitable. And some of the things like, if we increase choice, will make more equitable education system, building that type of system more complicated and difficult, okay? Now, I'll come to my conclusion. I understand that I have 2 minutes, right? Okay, good. So, you know, when I look around the world, I make the following conclusion. It seems to me like people are trying to do the wrong thing righter. Yeah? Rather than, you know, leaving the dead horse and rethink some of these things again, many countries are just trying to do the wrong thing in a righter way. And do you recognize this fellow here? Yeah, it's a Winston Churchill, sir. Yeah, and he said something that is a very telling, very fitting to the education reform and development business. He said that you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they have tried everything else. And I think he was right, also in education, that, you know, these right things will come probably from England and America, but they unfortunately try to do everything, all these things first. And Finland has not been Finland has never really listened to what the Winston Churchill has been saying anyway. So this is my conclusion. And this comes from I'm using the words of the OECD, and this is what the OECD is saying in the very good report on equity and quality in education. They say that the school choice advocates often argue that the introduction of market mechanisms allows equal access to high quality schooling for all. OECD continues by saying that, however, evidence does not support these perceptions because choice and market mechanisms can enhance segregation. Not my ideas, but this is a lesson that comes through the OECD from Finland. The highest performing education systems across the OECD countries are those that combine quality with equity. Very important notions, and I think we should be taking these more seriously. So the 3 lessons from Finland are the following. There may be some others, but let me conclude by this. We need more collaboration and less competition in education. I think this is a very clear notion from Finland and other high-performing education systems, that you cannot run education as you run a corporation or business. You have to rely on teacher collaboration, cooperative learning in the classrooms, and school networking, as we all probably know here. We need more trust-based responsibility and less test-based accountability. This is not to say that accountability should be abolished. I think we need to be held accountable, but the responsibility should go first. In my book, I have a definition for accountability that goes something like this. Accountability is what is left when responsibility is subtracted. In education, it's particularly true, okay? And the third one is that we need more evidence-based education policies and less experimentation with children. And when I look around the world, what people are doing, I see a lot of experimentation. There's no evidence, there's no research, there's no idea that this has been ever worked anyway. We just try things with children and hope that things work. And in most cases, it doesn't work like this, that we need to rely more on evidence. And finally, let me introduce to you our little son, Otto. Isn't he nice? Today, Otto is 7.5 months old. In this picture, he's about 2 months. And I have been doing a lot of traveling this year. He was born in April 17th. And every time I leave, of course, I go and say goodbye to my family, right? And he looks at me with his blue eyes and says that, "Daddy, stay home." And you know, in Finland, children mature so quickly that they can even talk when they're 2 months old. So he looks at me and says that, "Daddy, why do you need to go?" So what do you say to a 2-month or 7-month-old like this morning when you have to leave them home? So I say that, "Otto, on the day when you were born on April 17th, there were 350,000 children, boys and girls, your brothers and sisters who were born in this world. The next day, there were 350,000 boys and girls who were born in this world. During this conference, ladies and gentlemen, there will be 1 million new babies in the world. And I look at my son and I say that I'm afraid that if I don't go, that you and your brothers and sisters don't have a public school near them like I had or your mother had." And he looks at me and says that, "Okay, go, but come back." Thank you very much.